I got it.
All right.
All right, let's start. All right. So as we all know, in our digital age, we are becoming more engrossed in technology and its ever-expanding array of fields. There's nothing wrong with this, but many of us use it for personal pleasures instead of for the greater good of others. Not only humans, but for the world we live in, for nature. We seem to be spending increasing amounts of time inside instead of going outside to admire the beauty and fulfilling activities that nature has to offer. Time doesn't wait for us, so neither does nature. Every day brings new plaguing problems to our outdoor surroundings, problems that can be unequivocally avoided. As members of the BioBlitz team, we assessed these problems this summer throughout the green spaces in the city we've been proud to call home and speculated possible solutions that can be taken to address them. Next slide.
So for the abstract, basically is throughout like the summer, our project was to go to different green spaces, and we were using the iNaturalist app to basically show. We were using the iNaturalist app to basically show the Can you guys hear me?
We could hear a little bit now, but earlier we couldn't.
Yeah, your
Okay,
voice was cutting off a bit.
I just got a notification. Okay, I'll restart. So basically, the abstract is our project is basically showing how we're proving biodiversity within Jersey City, and me and my group members went throughout the 6 weeks. We went to different parks, and we were taking pictures with the iNaturalist app, which basically shows you what species, and it helps you name the species basically. And throughout the 6 weeks, that's what we've been doing. And we've been trying to prove that biodiversity does exist in Jersey City. And usually we know Jersey City to be one of the most diverse cities, but we never thought about the diversity amongst the plants, the birds, and the insects. So basically, that's what we did this whole summer, trying to prove biodiversity within the city.
All right, so for this BioBlitz project, basically the locations that we were using were all the parks that were within Jersey City. Although we were not able to evaluate all the parks, we were actually we attempted to do like one or two parks per zip code, and I think we did two for basically most of the ones that we did evaluate, which is good because if we were going to compare demographics and different park contents, it would be preferable to have more than one park so the information would be more reliable. A main goal for the project was drawing the relationship between biodiversity and the parks themselves. So like how like biodiversity helps us like in an urban area and how we would like aid the park, how we could both like grow together. And one of our missions was to try to identify most or all of the species, because of course it would be kind of be like really difficult to get all of them that were within each park that we evaluated. And we did this through the iNaturalist app and the Eastern Tree Field Guide and the Wildflower Guides, which were two manuals that we were given that further helped us identify species, gave us background information, told us where they would mostly be found, and a lot of other stuff as well. So for iNaturalist, it's basically a mobile app that we use to identify species. Basically, we could just take a picture of it, a good clear picture, and it would give us like a list of species that would like most closely resemble to the picture that we sent. It even tells us if it's seen nearby. So basically, if anybody else spotted the species and they had identified it already, we'd know that the species that we picked is probably correct. And also, we could also do it as well through describing the appearance. If we were not able to get a clear image of like a bird that was flying by, but we got a good look at it, we could describe it and then we could pick the picture that best fits the description. And since within the actual app there is a BioBlitz group, it allows us to see work of other BioBlitz members like Enes, Quinn, Mir, and my fellow peers. And it helps us, and they're allowed to basically verify that the species I identified is correct. So if I were to take a species and I identified it incorrectly, my peers could like go back and check over my work, see if I identified it correctly, so we could have the most accurate results possible. these are the 7 parks that we basically evaluated or were able to evaluate. So we have Newport Green, Hamilton Park, Van Vorst Park, Boyd McGinnis Park, Arlington Park, Audubon Park, and William M. Gallagher Park.
Okay, so there are around 60 parks in Jersey City, and we decided to pick 7 of those parks, as Mahmoud showed earlier. And we had 2 people go to each park, and these 2 people, they would count all the trees in the park to the best ability they could, and then they would average the number of trees. And then we would have the total acreage of the park, and by dividing the number of trees by the number of acres, we get the average number of trees per acre in the park. And so we went in the evening and the morning because that is the time when most of the wildlife is active, and that would give us more species to record than if we just went like in the afternoon. And we used iNaturalist. We used the Peterson's Guide for Eastern trees, and we also researched the zip codes and their incomes. So we looked at each park, what zip code it's in, and then we also looked at the income of the people around that park, as well as their race and ethnicity makeup. And then we also looked at impervious surface. So impervious surface is the surface of a park that's not natural. It's either made of concrete or asphalt or other unnatural surfaces. And we used satellite images from Google Maps to assess what percent and estimate how much of the surface of the park is impervious surface. And here we have our results. We have Arlington Park, Audubon Park, Boyd, McGinnis, Hamilton, Van Vorst, Newport, William M. Gallagher, and the ward and the zip code and the acres.
So a part of the results, we had the count. Two interns counted each park, but except for Van Vorst Park, we have decided in acres to compare basically the count number of trees, and we averaged it out per acre. So as you can see, Arlington Park is 3.52 acres, and the first intern counted 90 trees, the second intern counted 94. So average would be 92 trees, and it was about 26 trees per acre. Same thing with Audubon. And as you can see, Arlington and Audubon parks are very close in size, but their tree count is way off by about like 40 to 50 trees, because Audubon, the first count was 39, the second count was 36. Boyd McGinnis and William M. Gallagher are also similar parks in size, and Boyd McGinnis basically had almost half of the parks that William M. Gallagher does. Half of the trees, I'm sorry.
And this is the bar graph showing all the trees throughout the parks. So you have a visual view of the trees per park. These are the species in Arlington Park. There are around 22 species we found. Audubon Park, we found around 6. Boyd McGinnis Park, we found 11 species. Hamilton Park, there were 19. Those were one of the higher parks with more species. And Newport Green Park, we had 16 species there. And William M. Gallagher, there were 6. And Van Vorst, there were 26.
And this is a bar graph that basically helps you like put the names of all the parks, and it shows you the number of species. So you'd be able to compare the parks and the number of species based off the bar graph.
And this is a table that compares all the parks with a zip code, and then the median household income, the percentage of white, Asian, Hispanic, or Black, and the impervious surface we found from the satellite images. Is Divya here?
I think Matt said that she was having
Okay.
issues.
Yeah, I think she's still having issues with audio. So if someone's willing to just jump in a little bit and help move through her slides, that'd be really helpful.
So basically, we were going by like the assumption at the beginning of the project that larger parks would probably have more trees, as it would make sense. A larger park would basically, yeah, it would have more trees. But we figured out through this project that that was actually not the case because there were so many factors that actually intertwined with this, which was like the demographics, where the park was located, and a lot of other things. So basically, we were thinking that we should compare parks of similar sizes in their tree count. So we would compare Arlington and Audubon, like Quinn was saying, even though there was such a big gap. Boyd McGuinness with William M. Gallagher because they were of similar size. But then, yeah, we found out that there are so many different factors that go into it, and we will be discussing these factors in like basically a lot of the other discussions.
So moving on to species diversity, the definition is all of the different species within a given community. So this number can change at very unpredictable rates and times, some of which we are responsible for. So as a result, it is our responsibility to take the necessary steps to increase species diversity across the entirety of Jersey City parks. This can range from simple tasks such as planting different trees throughout all parks to more complex ones such as allocating more area for parks to be able to house more species and other things such as community gardens. So, for example, in our case study of the different parks within Jersey City, we found Arlington Park to be composed of mostly plant species and not enough insects and birds. So we can introduce more of those types of species, the ones that are lacking. And on the other hand, Audubon Park had no vine species, so introducing more plant vine species such as the common ivy and ground ivy would be more beneficial to these parks. Every park has its own flaws, so we should try to properly assess them and come up with solutions that we could take in the future.
So demographics. So when we looked at the park with the highest amount of income of people in the neighborhood, we found that it was Newport Green in the zip code of 07310. And it was also mostly white. And this park also had the most amount of trees per acre. And a lot of trees in the park is important because the more trees there are, the more transpiration there is. And transpiration, it releases water vapor in the atmosphere. And water has a higher specific heat than surfaces like asphalt and concrete on the ground or other surfaces. So the more trees there are in the park, the more cooling there is, and the cooler the environment will be. In many urban cities such as Jersey City, New York, there are heat islands, and because of all the tall buildings and all the roads and structures we have, it's very easy for us to have very high temperatures, and these high temperatures could cause heat illnesses for other people. So people in disadvantages neighborhoods and low-income areas without all these trees in their parks, they're going to have higher average temperatures in their neighborhood, and they're going to suffer more from heat illnesses. Fortunately, Arlington Park had had a good amount of species diversity, equating to as much as Hamilton Park. But even so, the majority black area of Audubon Park, which is in Greenville, has very low species diversity. In addition, the two parks with the most acreage are located in white majority neighborhoods. And when we look at the two smaller parks, Boyd McGuinness and William M. Gallagher Park, they have the best tree per acreage amount, surpassing even that of Newport Green. And this is due to the fact that it's a very small park. So the very small parks don't need as many trees as bigger parks to achieve the overall trees per acreage. And the high tree per acreage account allows for better cooling. So all the other parks should be replicated like these smaller parks.
Also,
So
continuing on to the
next we have
demographics, other than the fact that what's called that the parks that are located within white areas have more trees and it's like where people have like more income, the parks there also statistically speaking tend to have 5 times more people than parks in black or Hispanic neighborhoods. So basically white people use the parks more, therefore they tend to like care for it more and they tend to like do more annual events such as planting trees and other things like that in their areas.
So on to impervious surfaces. Oh, can you go back, please? So
Yeah.
onto impervious surfaces. Basically, what impervious surfaces means is parks that are built up with concrete or have brick, or basically they're not natural and they're not 100% like soil. So two parks with the most amount of impervious surfaces are located in neighborhoods with minorities and the least wealth. and two parks, which are located downtown, have an average amount of impervious surfaces, and Newport Green and Arlington Park have the least amount of impervious surface, showing that these should be like a model for a service type. And the more impervious surface that's present, it's the less of a cooling effect because some parks act as cooling effects with the shade and all the oxygen, and that's how it helps the ecosystem. So the more it has, basically, the worse it is for the park and the worse it is for us because we're not getting that 100. We're not getting basically all the effects that we could get from the trees and all the plants. Also, impervious surfaces cause increased runoff, erosion, and flooding. And more parks with greener spaces absorb heat better and have water. I'm sorry, absorb more water, so there wouldn't be as much flooding.
So some recommendations we have from our discussion. There should be a variety of different trees planted in parks with low amount of trees and variation. So a park shouldn't just have a lot of trees of one species. All those trees should be of different species. And this is because if there's a disease that kills one certain type of tree, and this certain park has only that certain type of tree, it's going to decimate most of the trees in the park. But if you have many different types of trees, no matter what disease enters the park, the tree disease, it's only going to affect a few of the species. So most of the species will survive, and in most circumstances, most of the trees will survive if they're all varied by species. In order to protect species diversity, invasive species, mostly insects in parks and ecosystems, they should be closely monitored and evicted to maintain stable microenvironments. More trees should be planted in the parks with minorities and low-income people, especially the zip codes of 07304 and 07305, which include the parks of Boyd McGinnis, William M. Gallagher, and Audubon Park. And this would allow people of color and low-income households to enjoy nature as much as the other neighborhoods. And we should try to minimize the percent impervious surface as much as possible. So this can be done by expanding the park or installing green infrastructure, which is basically building structures with greenery and biomaterials. And it will allow for a cooler environment, benefiting all of the city. And if all of this is done, the parks in Jersey City will be much better than they are now. These are references. And are there any questions?
First, thank you so much and congratulations. That is absolutely, that's a lot of work that you all did this summer. And thank you for sharing it. Folks, if you want to, you can just unmute yourselves if you have any questions for this group, and just go ahead and ask it. Phenomenal job, 100%. I see the comments coming in. I have a question. If you were to do this again next summer, like what would you do either differently, or what would you incorporate? Would you, I don't know, like would you look at different parks? Would you look at different species? How would you do this differently?
I think what we would do differently is there are more zip codes. I think there are around 5 zip codes in Jersey City. We only did 4. We would try to include all the zip codes in Jersey City and pick parks from all zip codes and pick an equal amount of parks per zip code. And we would also try to make sure that all the parks that we collect in each zip code, the sum of all the parks in each zip code, they would add up to the same acreages, just so we could get better experimental results.
Also, speaking on that, if we were to have like a larger group within the project, like next year, if we were to do it, we would be able to have more than one count. So we would be able to like get more accurate data. We'd be able to probably get more species, name more, because there would be more people looking for them. As something me and Enes maybe have looked for, someone else might have spotted a different species that we may not have noticed. So as the project gets larger, we'd be able to incorporate a lot more data. And as Anas said, we'd be able to probably incorporate other zip codes that we were unable to do due to the interest of time.
Sorry.
I wonder if I could ask a question or make a statement. I'm Don Torino, president of Bergen County Audubon Society, and I think you guys are doing an amazing job. Very nice, very good. So I know there were some questions about how to add more biodiversity, insects and birds, and what I guess the next step to be looked at or do a study with is the introduction of native plants to those parks. That would be, I know you talked about vine species or whatever, but so when you do that, make sure that they're native plants that you work into those areas, because that's the foundation of a true habitat. So just by introducing even a few native plants would greatly increase the biodiversity of insects and birds to that area. Simple thing to do, and it's amazing the difference that just a few natives will make in these small parks. So I wonder if there's any kind of follow-up in that and any kind of committees that you guys be forming later to work on these parks.
Thank you, Don. What do you think, BioBlitz group? I mean, that's an absolutely excellent point, and we will probably talk a little bit more about native plants and their impacts on, you know, specifically pollinator species and then birds later on. But that's a great point. Did you, in this study, investigate, and forgive me if you did and it was in your presentation, but the native versus non-native species in these parks?
We didn't focus on that for this study, but that's definitely something I think we could look at as something in the future for sure.
Well, we already have the data too, so that's what's helpful.
Yeah, if we took more time, we could analyze specifically the species we found, and we could research whether these species are native to those parks or Jersey City. Like if we had an extra few days, we could have done that, but we didn't do that for this project.
Sounds like a good fall internship.
Yeah, and then we could like probably plant those native species in all the parks, and then we could see results after a month.
Yep, absolutely.
Certainly a great start, and I'm proud of everybody. Great job.
Me too. Okay.
I had a question. Sorry. I was just curious. You said that you visited 7 different parks. I was just curious if like how many times did you, I'm sorry if like this was also in the presentation, but how many times did you visit those parks? Because I know that like maybe there's like some birds that don't like appear in like certain types of weather or like or just like nesting or something. So I was just curious how many times did you
Yeah,
visit the park?
so there were 2 people. One person would go to the park at their own time. So basically we went to the park 2 times. One person would go one time, the other would go the other time. They would average the number of trees they found, and they would compile the plants and wildlife they found. So we basically went there 2 times, one per person.
And
Okay.
also, piggybacking off of what Anas's saying, each park, we also had to do some of our like own independent work before we did tree count. So like I know for myself, like I was downtown by the park. So I went to the Newport Park multiple times, like more than 2 times, just to take like pictures and find new species. So when we were doing all the data, we also implemented stuff from the previous weeks.
Piggybacking off what both of them said, we also attempted to like visit the parks during the 2 counts at 2 different parts, 2 different times of the day. So basically, if one were to go in the morning, the other would go like in the afternoon or like towards the evening, just so like species that don't come out during the morning or like come out at night, we'd basically try to like maximize all the species that we could see, rather than both just come at the same time of the day and observe the same species that were already out there.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all again very much. If we were in person, we would all be clapping for you right now. But you guys did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Great, guys. Great job, guys.
And ladies. Sorry. I should always say that. Okay. I am going to, so you can stop sharing your screen if you'd like.
Okay. Okay.
Oh, Parbita has raised her hand.
Sorry, I joined in late, but is there somewhere where we'll be able to read the posters more in detail?
We will create a place, thank you very much for that question, on our website. We don't have that location just right now,